And again, 40 minutes to go in that time session, and then tea, refresher, supplementation, and then another session. Okay. One topic we are covering now is just as I say, a necessity rather than essential requirement, because at the end of the seminar we will have a look how to best distribute your competition and training exposures. And of course, to do that I require a little bit of extra information which I'm going to share with you now, which is known to you, and that's why I will kind of run it in a way, a throttle way, so that we don't kind of spend much time on it, because it is something which you are well aware of. Planning training periods and macrocycles. So what about it? We all exist in the same, paradigm of annual periodization, right? So we all know that there is a preparatory, competitive, and transitional period. Nothing new about it. The pattern still fits into the traditional line of periodization, which typically is about volumes, which are from top goes down towards competition phase, and intensity, which goes up towards competition phase, and eventually skill training is more or less duplicating or following the curve, which is intensity one. So in that way we will have preparatory or preparation phase here, competition phase here, and then transition somewhere after you complete your competition season. In training periods part, it is again essential that you follow kind of certain standard procedures, and you plan certain standard blocks, which are again divided into general preparatory period and then specific preparatory period, whereby most of your kind of training time in general preparatory period is supposedly dedicated to general conditioning, strength and conditioning, and then less part of it is supposed to be specific. Whereas in specific preparatory period, you will actually kind of swap training means and methods in favor of specific conditioning and specific training, with general conditioning and general training be on the lower side. So in that kind of basic overview, you will have preparatory period divided into general and specific preparatory. They may not necessarily be equal in duration. They may be kind of general bit lengthier and specific bit shorter, or the other way around, like specific bit lengthier and general bit specific bit lengthier and general bit shorter. And of course, the distribution and training means and methods is not that obvious that you say, okay, we are doing only general stuff here, and then we stop doing that, we start doing kind of specific stuff there. No, it really doesn't work that way. However, the general preparatory period is not only meant for strength and conditioning and developing any other motor qualities. It of course contains other components of training, which are specific skills, techniques, tactics, psychological aspects, and those are also happening here. So there is no such thing as typically general or typically specific. Instead, there will be always sort of a distribution of training means and training methods, which you preferably supposed to be using in either of those parts of training of preparatory period. So how? If you look at the beginning of preparatory period, general preparatory exercises or means and methods will be roughly at 40%, auxiliary will be roughly about 30%, specific will be about 20%, and competitive will be about 10%. So these are the four major kind of groups of training means, which typically in training methodology we suggest you perhaps can use as your training means. General preparatory, clear-cut. Specific preparatory, clear-cut. Auxiliary, those are the means and methods of which kind of sitting between general and specific. All right? So, at the end of preparatory period, I repeat, general part, your general preparatory will go down to about 30, auxiliary will go about 35%, specific will go up to about 25, competitive still at the lower side at about 10% of training time. That's basically how you can visualize your ratio of training means within beginning and end of preparatory period. When you enter specific preparatory or special preparatory period, what happens? Yes, general exercises are getting down to about 25. Auxiliary will also go down, whereas specific are increasing. And also increasing will be competitive exercises. So how? By the end of specific preparatory period, your general preparatory exercises are at about 10%, so kind of getting down. Auxiliary at about 25, whereas specific are at 45. And you start competing more by the end of specific preparatory period. So it's a very rough, of course, calculation, but at least it gives an idea on how the proportion of various means and methods are. To again make a point that there is no such thing as typically 100% or even 80% of general and specific. It is all a mixture, right? Then, the important part here is that when we talk about periods of training, we also start visualizing what are the smaller units of training which you are dealing with. And typically those will be mesocycles, all right? Mesocycles typically is what? Like 2 to 6 weeks of duration periods of time during which you can fix and achieve certain objectives. And those, of course, will be constructed from the particular types of macrocycles. Microcycles, each one being a week of duration. So imagine that your preparatory period starts at the beginning of the season. Behind you is your transitional period. So you enjoyed a bit of life without training and without kind of many other obligations, and then you step back again into preparatory period, and that's what's happening. You are kind of packing that preparatory period from different types of mesos. Mesocycles, one will be engaging mesocycle, typically the beginning of the cycle, like a bigger one, when you are again joining after transitional period, you have to resume your training the way it has been in the previous year. So typically there will be like 2 to 3, sometimes 4 weeks of gear in. Weeks when you just combine various types of training in reasonably equal proportions so that you are actually getting back into business of training, right? Without injuries, without any kind of issues, so that you resume your training activities. And again, if we are talking about preparatory period, and particularly its general part, then logically speaking, you are pushing or introducing a basic mesocycle of about 6 to 8, sometimes 7 weeks of time and whatever, which typically will be dedicated to strength and conditioning. That's a kind of overall look at the periodization, mesocycles, and your type of training which typically we are following. So that engaging mesocycle of roughly 3 weeks and basic mesocycle of roughly 6 weeks basically constitute general preparatory part of your preparatory period. General, getting into business, getting through strength and conditioning, so that when this is done, you can proceed with next phase, which is specific preparatory period. And when you feel that your strength and conditioning objectives are achieved, typically you will be throwing in one mesocycle of training, which is known as control preparatory, roughly for 4 weeks' time, which actually is a part of your preparatory period. So, when control preparatory mesocycle of 4th-week duration is added to both of them, and you top your virtual general preparatory period with specific preparatory period, which is control preparatory, 4 weeks duration, and then you basically fixed your preparatory period altogether of 13 weeks of duration. Why I'm showing it to you in that quick and very generalistic form? So that you have grab a bigger picture idea that you don't really plan your training kind of 1 week to another week to another week to another week. Think bigger blocks, mesocycles. So you see here 3 mesocycles which have completely different objectives, right? So the first one is helping you to get your athletes back into training. And you spent roughly 3 to 4 weeks on that. The second one is your strength and conditioning issues, which are supposed to be concentrated in one particular place, and that would be the right one. It could be 5 weeks, it could be 6 weeks, it could be any number of weeks, like up to about 9, 10 or something like that. So then eventually, the third one is supposed to be a conversion of what you have achieved in your strength and conditioning into something specific, which belongs to your sport, to your event, and so on and so forth, so that your preparatory period, engagement, strength and conditioning, conversion into specific fitness. See, there is no performance yet. No, not at all. It is just you are getting into preparatory period and through preparatory period. And when you got into training, created certain background of strength and conditioning, then converted it into specific fitness, then your competition period is planned as such. So 3 weeks gear in, right, 6 weeks basic, 4 weeks control preparatory, 13 weeks of preparatory period, 2 mesocycles are constituting general preparatory, 1 constituting specific preparatory period. 13 weeks of time is what? 3 months, right? 3.5 months. What happens next? When you complete the preparatory period, then competitive period starts. Simple. And in that competitive period, depending on your age of your athlete, depending on the objectives, you will again have that competitive period split into 2 major subdivisions. One will be early competitions, pre-competitive. The other one will be main competitions. So, by some definitions, competitive period is meant for the maintenance of performance. However, at some point you ask yourself a question. Is it really what I want, maintenance of performance, or I need that performance to be still improving throughout the competitive period? It very much depends again on your competition schedule. If there are certain competitions packed together with a small gap between and without not a big kind of issue of altogether repicking, then okay, you can say maintenance is fine, consistency is good. So you reach certain level, you perform consistently, you don't push harder, you don't push further, so that your athlete is actually comfortably performing. Sometimes you may well think, okay, no, I need to perform at certain level at selection competitions, and I still have to perform at a better level in the main competitions. It all depends. However, practicality-wise, you are getting into competitive period, and this is your early competitive, and this is main competitions. And again, I have to reiterate, one of the reasons, or perhaps the only reason we are talking about this now, because at the last session we will see which types of competitions would be fitting into which type of your periodization and the periods and mesocycles. All right? So, pre-competitive phase consists of large amount of specific conditioning, particularly at the beginning. They're still there. Those coincide with warm-up competitions, friendlies and model competitions, so on and so forth. The focus shifts from the performance contributing elements to the performance outcomes only at the end of the phase. So performance as such, and it's only basically in professional sports we are facing the situation when athletes can perform consistently like for a lengthy period of time. We cannot afford that in the amateur setup. We will still have to peak, re-peak, kind of get a little bit lower on performance, a little bit higher on performance, and that is where early competitions are actually pushing you or leading you towards main competitions when you have to deliver your medals. So, back to the means and methods distribution. It actually is an extension of that previously shown table. See, general preparatory exercises are dropping down to about 10%. They're still there. You still do some general issues in training, but not much. Whereas specific are getting up to 50% in the early competition phase, and then you're competing more frequently, all right, like about 25%, and then main competitive phase, 10 and 10, and then 50% are competitive, 30 are specific, 10 and 10 are here. So if you look at competition practice, obviously it increases towards the main competition phase. So, mesocycle-wise, remember, different objectives. Getting back to training, getting through strength and conditioning, converting strength and conditioning gains into specific fitness, then you're getting into pre-competition mesocycles, roughly 3 to 4 weeks duration, where you place your warm-up competition, your training exposure, your other stuff when you go out and when you need to start performing to assemble that particular type and picture and then the setup of competitions, which is to be followed in typically 4 to 5 weeks of competition mesocycle. Why that long? Because you cannot actually expect it to be maintained longer than that period of time. You cannot remain on the peak of performance typically more than 5 to 6 weeks. So that is how the whole thing is done, and that actually constitutes your competition period. So eventually you have a competition period of pre-competitive meso, early competitions, competitive meso, main competitions. So altogether, roughly that competitive period can be of 7 to sometimes 9 weeks of time. And then transitional period, of course, active rest, recovery, it means meant for rehabilitation, treatment as such if required. And then, in other words, that is known as controlled detraining, so that your athletes are getting some deconditioned, detrained a bit, but not much, because again, it's supposed to be controlled, so that you can resume back into the next cycle. So, eventually, why I was telling that whole stuff to you, to bring you to the simple macrocycle idea and picture, which typically you are facing in your year-to-year practice. If you are following double periodization cycle, that's exactly what we were doing, combining mesocycles into periods and sub-periods, basic, engaging, control preparatory of 13 weeks, competitive of 7 weeks, and 3 weeks of transition. You're getting 23 to 25, 26 weeks of a cycle. It's typically 1/2 of the year. And then, if it starts somewhere in January or in February, you can actually count. So if you have, say, competitions which are away from each other, kind of 4 to 5 months, you will have to follow double periodization. If they are fitting into 1 month or something somewhere in October or November, then single periodization will be good enough. So this is how your training actually is arranged when you are following more or less the basic periodization patterns. Again, I repeat, engaging mesocycle followed by basic, followed by control preparatory. These three are your preparatory period. Pre-competitive and competitive are your competitive period, 3 weeks of 23 plus minus as I keep saying. You can have one more here, you can have two more here, and then another two here, so that becomes 23 to 26 sometimes weeks altogether. So that macrocycles are of course planned in such a manner that your actual goal is to perform when? Here in main competitions, all right? So, but before doing that, you have to go through early competitions, you go through specific conditioning, general conditioning, and involvement into training in the first place. So that is how the whole thing gets into picture. And to kind of wrap that picture in whatever planning way, here is your annual planning, here is your macrocycle, here is your preparatory period, competitive, transitional, preparation, off-season, this is American terminology, this is East European terminology, and then here down is your strength and conditioning endeavors, all right? So HP stands for hypertrophy, BS stands for basic strength, and again hypertrophy, again basic strength, and then there is active rest, strength, power, and so on and so forth, maintenance, and finally kind of competing somewhere around here. That, however, is a different story and not the objective of today's discussion. So that when we agree on macrocycle thing, we now have to look into the year, all right? And here comes the point. When it depends on your sports, if you are power sports, if you are team games, if you are individual sports, strength related or power related, if you are in individual games like tennis or table tennis or badminton, if you are in team games like basketball, volleyball, and so on and so forth, if you do have a league matches, for instance, in your kind of calendar, if you don't, and depending of course on the number of peakings per year, you will have various models and various options of annual planning. And these are the ones: single periodization, double periodization, typically the ones which are with you when you are under 12 athletes or under 14 athletes. You may well get into triple or triplex when you are under 17 athletes or under 19, and when competitions are more frequent. And you may well get into triplex and multiple if you are reaching some sort of a semi-professional or professional level. Now, how does it work for different sports? For different sports, it works kinda differently. If you talk about endurance sports, long distance running, middle distance running, like a little bit this way, that way, long distance swimming, cycling. Do we have cycling coaches here? No. Okay. So that is how typically you get into single periodization cycle. All right? So you will have lengthy preparatory period, you have reasonably long competitive period, and then you have a transition here. So in endurance sports such as marathon and long distance running, participation is limited. You are not competing frequently anyway. So for that reason, results in planning long macrocycles of training after or equal a year duration. So that's how, if your 2, 3, 4 competitions are getting somewhere in the month of October and November, you are planning something like that. Very lengthy preparatory period. You can do anything you want here with strength and conditioning, specific fitness, early competitions here, and then like within 1 or 1.5 months or maximum 2 months, you got your SGFI, your nationals, and whatever else. However, if your competitions are scattered and there is a gap between them, and you cannot maintain the high performance for a longer period of time, so that you will use basically double periodization system, and the macrocycle which we were constructing like about 10-15 minutes ago is typically that you will be using 2 of such cycles in 1 year, right? 26 plus 26, 52. 23 plus 28, 50 something. So it depends on the competition calendar. Then, power sports like sprints, jumps, weightlifting. Do we have weightlifting here? I thought you were raising hand. No. Okay. So those will be having actually shorter periods of time. All right. They can be picked more frequently because of the nature of the game. All right. And this is typically a triple periodization program whereby you can have one major competition somewhere in April, another one major somewhere in August, and another something major like in the kind of month of December. So that typically again is like World Cups or Cups related and kind of competitions like Diamond League or Golden League or whatever in athletics. All right. So in same way power sports can be used like a triple periodization as mentioned. That calendar year can be divided into 3 to 5 microcycles of only 12 to 15 weeks of duration. You can do that too. But then again, you will be actually having a bit of a problem with planning competitions and competition exposures. All right? Triplex, it's a 3 peaks. However, 1 transitional period will be missing. So you have kind of less duration periods of time to apply all your knowledge of training and coaching science. All right, team games. If you imagine basketball, volleyball, handball, beach volleyball perhaps, and then particularly if you are in advanced level and you can have a league matches, for instance, which is reasonably lengthy, then what happens? You basically are facing a reasonably short preparatory period and then quite lengthy competitive period whereby you are playing again those matches, be it a league or championships or something. Sometimes it is up to 6-month duration, and it means that you have to achieve all your objectives of strength and conditioning in a very limited period of time. And then you can only top up it with specific conditioning during competitive period as such, particularly playing and manipulating with competition calendars. All right? Same look here with team games, still a single periodization with short preparatory, lengthier competitive periods. So this is one of the shortest possible blocks, and this actually belonging to volleyball. And years ago I was lucky enough to work with such greats of volleyball in India like Shamsundar Rao, and when he was chief coach of national junior team. That was typically a preparation block before the Junior Asian Championships many years ago. So as you can see here, everything goes into smaller portions, into a very packed kind of training, planning and so on. Like block number 1, more like involvement, 3 weeks only of basic meso, another 3 of control preparatory, another 3 of pre-competitive. So again, job to be done wise and objectives wise, 1 of just involvement cycle, then 3 weeks of combined improvement of fitness with specific and specific means and skills, control preparatory meso of 3 weeks, improvement of skills, technique and tactics in game related conditions, pre-competitive meso modeling of certain game situations in training and the matches, and of course planning practices like tests, selection trials, tournament, training matches and so on and so forth. So what we are trying to actually get into the knowledge and understanding of the administrators, that at the age of your athletes, which is like 19 plus when they are getting into semi-professional manner, that would be the situations which you might plan and plan accordingly for their competition and training exposures. That is how it is important. Then, of course, in a more or less similar manner, multiple periodization is there. that is about, first of all, tennis, table tennis, badminton, squash. We have squash in the state? No. All right. So this is typically carrying or catering for multi-picking. When you have to perform in the Grand Slam tournaments like once in 3 months, there is a tournament which you have to be picked for and which you have to actually perform at your level best. So it includes ranking tournaments, it includes warm-up tournaments, major tournaments, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's the end of it for today. And as I was telling you, not for today, sorry, before the tea break. The next is the tea break, and then after the tea break, we are concluding with planning competition exposure. I understand that, that's why I'm saying that is a known things to you. That's why I was not trying to interrupt your nice talking to each other, but the next one you will be sitting quiet. Do we have an agreement on that? Thank you.